This demo will focus on creating an EV for SharePoint policy, including some of the new content sources and some best practices. So to begin, click on SharePoint under Policies. Now click New to start the policy wizard, and just click Next on the subsequent slides until you get to the Rules pane. On the Rules tab, you can add in multiple rules which will be processed in prioritized order. If you were to create, for example, an exception rule, maybe you wanted to archive everything except for zip files, you could create a rule first in priority that said do not archive zip files, and then after that just do an archive everything rule, and the exclusion would process first. In this case, we're going to just go through and create different rules for the different content sources. On the first tab of the Rule Creation dialog, you put in a name and a description. In this case, we're just going to call it Rules for Discussion. Then click on the rule type. Now you can see that there are three choices for rule type: Do Not Archive, Archive, and Delete. Do Not Archive is used to add an exclusion. For example, if you wanted to archive everything except zip files, your first rule might be a do not archive rule that would highlight that you don't want to archive zip files. If this is first in the list, it will be processed first. Then you could follow that up with an archive everything rule. The exclusion would process before the archive everything. The delete rule is used to actually delete active content in SharePoint. So you have to be careful with this rule, but it is a very powerful tool to be able to, for example, delete MP3 files from the SharePoint environment or something similar. In this example, we're just going to do an archive rule. So choose Archive, and then click on the Content tab. The Enterprise Vault 10.0.2 release added many new content sources for SharePoint. Now you can archive list content, wikis, blogs, discussions, and everything you see here. Now, in this particular case, we're going to do a discussion rule. So we just want to click the discussion box and then proceed on to the metadata tab. Since this is a discussion board rule, we want to add on a metadata value that is also part of the rule. The reason for this is that a discussion board consists of many conversations. Ideally, you want to capture the entire conversation as a single entity, and that's exactly what Enterprise Vault does. It doesn't capture each individual post and reply, but instead it captures the entire conversation. Now, the problem you can run into is that a conversation may span multiple archiving runs. And if you're using regular storage, no problem. We'll just overwrite that conversation on every archive run with the entire conversation if any changes have been made. Now, if you're using worm storage, write once, read many storage, we don't have that ability because of the nature of worm storage. So in that case, you will actually end up with multiple conversations. So it's a best practice to, if you're able to, based on the regulations that govern your company, if you're able to, only archive discussion boards if they haven't changed within 7 days. Meaning that each individual conversation will be archived if they haven't changed in 7 days. This gets you the complete conversation most of the time, because if it hasn't changed in 7 days, there's a good chance that it won't change further from that point. Now we'll create a rule for social media and Okay, now we've selected archive for our social media and list content rule type, and now there's one other thing we want to enable here, and that's the ability to capture embedded images. Now this comes into play in the case of a wiki that may have a picture that's very critical to just the overall context of the wiki page. So you want to make sure you capture embedded images if that's important to you for e-discovery reasons. So check the box and then proceed to the Content tab. Now, since this is a social media rule, we're going to basically choose all of the social media sources that are important to us: blogs, wikis, and so on. Our next rule will archive a custom content type. Custom content types are not that common, but they do happen. They can be used within a document library, for example, to allow you to specify the document template that's used when you choose New, the metadata that is captured with the document, and also the amount of time that document will live in SharePoint. So, for example, you could have a legal contract that would use the company's template for a legal contract. And whenever you go File New in a document library, you would see Legal Contract as one of the options, which would immediately open Word with the proper template, and upon saving, force you to enter in metadata that was considered critical for that content. In order to capture this type of content, use the bottom box on the Content field and simply put in the name of the content type. For a final rule, we're going to create a document library rule, so more of a traditional rule that you're probably used to if you've used EV for SharePoint in the past. On the Content tab for this rule, we're just going to simply choose the document library and all the other related libraries. Now, if we wanted to, we could add in a metadata rule to modify the document library rule if we wanted to. The metadata, like you can use basically any custom metadata field or any of the standard SharePoint metadata fields like modified by, created date, modified date, or any field that you create as well. In this case, we're not going to do that, so just continue on to the File rule. On the File tab, we're just going to modify the rule slightly by making it apply only to files greater than 1024 KB, and also modify it so that it only affects Office documents. Now that we've created the rules, we move on to the other aspects of the policy. On the next tab, the shortcut policy, you define when to remove archived items from SharePoint and what to do at that point. Do you replace them with a shortcut or not? Now, if you want items to immediately be replaced with a shortcut once they're archived, you would check the Remove Items Older Than box and put 0 days in the box beside that. And then immediately below that, choose to replace items with a shortcut. The last item on this dialog, Remove Shortcuts Older Than, this allows you to automatically have your shortcuts expire in SharePoint. And you may want to do this because as long as that shortcut is in place in SharePoint, SharePoint is going to fully index the content and the metadata, even though the item actually resides in the archive. While this is great initially, as that content ages, you may want to get it out of your SharePoint index just because the content becomes less relevant. So you may want to automatically eliminate the shortcut by getting rid of older shortcut items. Similar to the previous slide, this is now modifying how list items and list attachments behave once they've been archived. So the first box allows you to specify whether or not you want to replace attachments within lists with a shortcut, and the second one allows you to actually remove the items older than a certain period of time once they've been archived. So you actually affect the SharePoint environment. The next tab lets you prune documents in the case of a document library that has SharePoint versioning enabled. Versioning is a great tool in that it captures every single change made to a document as it's being produced. Every time you check in the document, another version is created. The problem is it doesn't save the deltas. It actually saves another full document every time. At least that is the case with 2007 and 2010, SharePoint 2007 and 2010. What this does is it allows you to specify which versions, how many versions to keep in SharePoint, and then all the other older versions move to Enterprise Vault. So in this case, we want to keep just the latest version in SharePoint and move all the other versions to Enterprise Vault. The end user can still get at the older versions from within SharePoint, but the Permissions tab allows you to specify how to handle items that have item level permissions. Enterprise Vault handles folder level permissions but does not acknowledge individual item level permissions. So you have two choices. You either ignore items with item level permission, meaning that you don't archive them at all, or you archive them but they will have, they'll revert to folder permissions in the archive. The draft version tab allows you to specify whether or not you want to archive the minor versions or draft versions within SharePoint. Minor versions or draft versions are versions that are not published to the general SharePoint public. They're versions that the author can only see, but it's a way of tracking revisions before you're ready to share the document to a wider audience. Next, we have a summary tab which just displays all the aspects of your policy. Click the Finish button and the policy is ready to go.